what advice do you have for guys about setting boundaries with women? A shitload of men are being fucking manipulated and walked over like fucking dummies.
Setting boundaries for women. Um, yeah, there's a lot to this. I think one is you need to understand your own value here a little bit. And it needs to always come from a place where you're not chasing. I think a lot of this boundary setting usually just comes because you're so needy for this girl, you've pedestaled her, you have such a big fear of loss. That's where it comes in. I don't think there's a way around this. You can't have a guy that is so desperately in love with a girl, so scared of losing her, and then try to him some strategies around, oh, you need to learn to say no and do that. Like, you're just not going to implement anything if you think you're going to lose this girl. Well, that's where the fear of loss comes from. So I think it's probably a slow progress, but you need to get to the point where all the girls you're interacting with, you're only investing as much as they're investing back into you. You need to start understanding your own actual worth and value here. You do need to have an understanding of what is actually going to create like loss, what is actually going to fuck up this interaction. Most times it's not setting the boundaries and being too needy. So I think that's all really important. When it comes to the actual boundary setting, then I think a lot of this is going to be implementation through behaviors. It's going to be number one, knowing what boundaries you actually want to set beforehand. So you're not trying to like fuddle around with it. Like, okay, she pulls out a phone on a date. Is that something I care about? Is that something I'm going to put up with? If she flakes, like, where am I sitting here? So I think pre-analyzing and understanding what behaviors are acceptable and what aren't, and then understanding as well, what are you going to do about this? If a girl pulls out a phone on a date, are you telling her to fuck off and never speaking to you again? Or are you addressing it verbally? Are you pulling away some attention? How do you deal with that? Back to my last point, if a girl flakes on you, again, how do we deal with this? So I think first step is making sure you're not pedestaling, you're not super needy. Second step is going to be understanding what you're actually accepting here, what you actually want, and where your boundaries actually sit in these relationships. And then three, what is the appropriate course of action when a boundary is breached? But yeah, this is a long process, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think having boundaries is ultimately being willing to walk away, right? So, and enforcing those boundaries. And like Marcus said, take some time to write down what your value systems are, right? Like, what do you value? Fitness, certain behaviors, what do you tolerate? What do you not tolerate? A buddy of mine, David, he's like, he just won't date girls from Dubai. It's kind of a funny anecdotal boundary setting, um, but yeah, I think spending some time to figure out what you like and what you don't like, because in my opinion, the types of girls I like now is probably different than the ones I like back in 2010, 2011, right? So having enough volume, having enough abundance, and I think when it comes to boundaries, some things maybe one warning up to three, and then you got to be able to walk away. And then for other boundaries, probably if one of them just gets broken, like if she punches your mom in the face, I mean, that's probably not a boundary that you give a warning. You probably just end it right then and there, right? As far as I would probably have two boundaries, one for short-term dating, one for long-term. If it's a girl that's like short-term dating, it's just for fun, I'm not going to take her that seriously. I'm probably going to have less in terms of like her lifestyle decisions as long as there's mutual respect. If it's like serious dating, long-term relationships, I'm going to have more boundaries, right? So I think you're going to have to define what they are, and it's going to be different for every single person.
I see some guys have it kind of upside down sometimes. Like I seen guys do this thing where they ask, "Should I call her out for not replying for a few days?" Like, uh, call her out? What? What the fuck are you talking about? If she hasn't replied for a few days, you don't need to be fucking wimpy and needy and fucking weird about it. This is such a weird behavior that's gonna be
Yeah.
such a turnoff for her. Yes, it's a turnoff for you, but if you actually had abundance, then you could very easily learn message game the right way for example, and send her another message to revive the conversation, talk to more women, come back to her after 2 weeks by putting her at the back of the line, all kinds of these things. And then there are these obvious boundaries like, would you let a woman peg you? And most guys are going to be,
Yes,
well,
of course.
obviously not. Obviously, come on, Marcus. Most,
Nice. Oh man.
what did you say?
Don't act like you don't love a good pegging, all right? That's his clear boundary. If you don't peg me, we're done. Okay, we're finished.
God damn. Okay, moving on.
No, but actually, can I just add on to that? Because I think you brought up a really good point here,
mm,
which is one of your boundaries should not be based on attraction. Like if the girl's not attracted to you, that's not a boundary you have to enforce. Like if a girl is stop replying or some shit, that's not a boundary that you need to get like a big ego about. You're like, fuck, I need to call her out of not being attracted to me or some shit. That's very different. I think sometimes you're right. Guys do get very egotistical and they're very worried. They're like, I don't want a girl to fucking disrespect me. And what happens is the girl's like, hey, my grandmother just died. I can't come tonight. I'm so sorry. Let's plan something next week. And guys will be like, damn, I'm not gonna, that crosses my boundary. A girl can never flake on me, okay? And they're like, how do I call this girl out? It's like, bro, settle the fuck down, all right? So there is the other side of this, right? There is the side where guys are trying to like enforce boundaries that don't need to be enforced. So if you're lacking value or the girl's not really into you, then you need to make sure you're actually building attraction as opposed to like setting a boundary. And if the girl actually has valid excuses for things or there's like stuff, it's like not every single time you have to enforce something. So I think it's actually a good point you bring up.
mm, definitely. It's like obviously there are the obvious boundaries, like you wouldn't let her do these severe things where you definitely won't let that happen. But there are cases, and we're probably all guilty of this. Like I had an ex-girlfriend who was a very bad person, and it's like there's a saying, I'm not sure if it's actually true, but like a frog in a boiling water or something, it won't jump out if it starts cold and then starts to boil. I don't know
Yeah,
if that's
slow. Yeah,
actually
yeah. I think
true.
the analogy is like you slowly heat it up that little by little, it doesn't realize it's getting cooked alive because it's just been like a temperature over a few minutes. Yeah. If it's
Exactly.
like
Yeah.
small enough, you don't notice the change. Yeah.
That's
I
how it
think
was for me. I was just like too dumb to fucking pick it up. So like part of me is like there is this problem of awareness. Like at which point do you have to say no? Because sometimes these things, depending on what it can be, however vague that may be, if she's particularly abusive, there's only so much you should let happen. But then it's like, do you want to continue this for the rest of your life? Obviously not, if you really think about it. So that's why boundaries are important. So for some guys, to calm down with this boundary setting is needed, like with the message game example. And for others, there's also this aspect of sometimes these things can kind of creep in, and you just have to constantly be checking to make sure that this doesn't fucking take hold of everything. Like I wasn't very specific there, but this relationship of mine was such a fucking long time ago, so I can barely remember. But she was a fucking crazy one.
I'm
Like
curious,
that's
Ice,
what
did
they all
you?
say, but she seriously did go to mental hospital.
Yeah, I'm curious, Ice. Did your friends ever come in and say like, dude, what the fuck are you doing with this insane person?
Uh I don't even know. Well, it was probably like I had another ex-girlfriend who was just like constantly fighting any new girlfriend I would get. They were just like, I don't
Yeah,
know.
man,
I would just
crazy.
remember those things.
Yeah, I think like having a good social circle here and some like close friends can also be really helpful. Even like within our community, we have guys sometimes jump on our live calls or they'll like post in the group, and you'll have other guys coming in and saying like, "Yeah, I don't think you should put up with this," or like, "I think you got to be careful here." And so even like as lame as it sounds, even if it's online friends, right? But or even like close friends telling you like, "Hey, man." The way this girl is like acting or like what you're putting up with here, I don't think is okay. Is really nice to be able to have. And I think like getting that third perspective, but you got to be open to it, right? And so if you're not sure, like honestly, the best thing to do is actually get feedback. If you're starting to see a girl, get feedback. Speak to your friends and be like, "Yo, you've met this girl. What are your thoughts? What do you actually think?" Like, you can say whatever you want. I'm not gonna get upset. Like, tell me what you think, because this is really you can. I agree with you, Aish. Guys can get a little bit blinded, or it can be such a slow change you don't notice, or you like start making excuses, or you have that fear of loss. Sometimes it's nice to just have a really close friend that can be like, bruh, the fuck you doing? Okay. You never used to be someone that loved getting pegged. Now you're just getting pegged every day. What's happening? You sure you're okay with this? So yeah, I think it's yeah, it's nice to have.
Hmm. I'll be honest though, like with this particular golfer and I was referring to, I wouldn't have been ready for a conversation like that. I just didn't have like a support group or like those kinds of friends, and like I, especially person like me back then, we're a typical man. We just don't talk about these things necessarily unless we really have that kind of close friendship, which I never particularly had. I had like nerdy friends and they were just like so fucking unrelatable. So, well, I was also a bit of a nerd, but I was completely different in many ways. So, like, I personally wouldn't have been ready. So yeah, I think there's a big issue with like your own personal readiness and awareness to set these boundaries. So I feel like with any kind of discussion on boundaries, it's always hard to kind of pin it down because sometimes you're just not ready to take that kind of feedback, or you're just not aware that there's a pan of water fucking boiling you alive.